dead. This is the afterlife. And I'm God.
You are not God.
Blasphemy.
A theme that has existed since Legacy Trek, but has recently been emphasized in the latest Star Trek Picard series, is the question of whether Q, and in particular the John Delancey's Q, is or are gods. Certainly to answer this question, we have to define what a god is or is not. Now, to be fair, I don't think a god actually exists in the Trek universe, but we'll get more into that later. Certainly in the show, there are those who believe that a god, or gods, do inhabit their worlds. Certainly in the show, there are those that believe that higher powers do actually exist. In fact, in the original series, we know that Christianity still had some form of hold on, at a minimum, Terrans. As an example, the original Enterprise had a cathedral, and there were references to God and Jesus throughout the series. You can see it in Season 2, Episode 4, Who Mourns for Adonis, where we have a specific god, and outright Christian references, such as Season 2, Episode 25, Bread and Circuses, where there is a direct correlation to a belief in Jesus. And it wasn't just the Terrans. Vulcans were deeply religious, as are Klingons, who killed their gods because they were too much trouble, and I haven't even talked about the Bajorans. As stated, there were cultures and civilizations that built their belief systems around gods. These gods could be anything from omniscient to omnipotent to those who simply have starships. Effectively, the various gods would be inconsistent and only have varying powers. Now, to be honest, this way of looking at a god is pretty useless. By these definitions, a small child is a god to an ant, or at least a titan, but probably a god. So, we're going to have to get very specific since there are so many belief systems that exist. To that point, we're going to be looking at Jean-Luc Picard, John Delancey's Q, Quinn, as well as Guinan and the Elorians.
My people and the denizens of the Q continuum struck a truce.
Denizens?
Well, I'm not gonna call them gods, that's for damn sure.
Because of this, it is possible that other Q, or the Q continuum themselves, are different, but we don't have any evidence to show that. Also, when you look at John Delancey's Q and references to him being a god, it is more akin to the Abrahamic gods, and if it's more akin to the Abrahamic gods, that's the standard we're going to hold him to. Unfortunately, there are 3 different sects of said Abrahamic god, and each sect has subsects which differ wildly. So even narrowing it down to that specific entity, the god still has a wide array of who he is and is not. For this purpose, let's focus on the commonly accepted traits of this god. Now, there will be faiths that add or remove some of these traits, but for the most part, this is what everyone agrees that the Abrahamic god is. Specifically, the god is omnipotent, omnipresent, omnibenevolent, has omniscience, and will be everlasting. Let's just get into it. The first aspect we'll be analyzing is if the Q are actually omnipotent, or all-powerful. Now, to be fair, the Q are Herculean. They are one of the most indomitable species in the galaxy. While there are some beings that appear to match their capabilities, there aren't many. And, just to say it, even if they had peers, that wouldn't preclude them from being gods. What does preclude them from being omnipotent, however, is their weaknesses.
You're using humans as your game pieces?
You see that? I'm honestly trying to vaporize you at this moment.
Nothing happened. Nothing.
We know that the Q can first of all be depowered, from John Delancey's Q to that of Quinn. Something that can be depowered is unlikely to be omnipotent or all-powerful. Additionally, thanks to Voyager, we also know that the Q can create tools and weapons in which they can be killed by. Again, an omnipotent entity that can be killed is not likely to be omnipotent. Not according to traditional Abrahamic beliefs, at least. At best, they appear to have omnipotence that is akin to Greek mythology, kind of like that of Zeus, and we'll discuss that a bit later.
I am curious. Have the Q always had an absence of manners? Or is it the result of some natural evolutionary process that comes with omnipotence?
What? But you mustn't think of us as omnipotent, no matter what the continuum would like you to believe. You and your ship seem incredibly powerful to life forms without your technical expertise. It's no different with us. We may appear omnipotent to you, but believe me, we're not.
So for most purposes, they aren't omnipotent, but are they omnipresent? This question is actually a lot harder to answer than you might think. The Q have the ability to appear virtually anywhere, and additionally at any point in time. Thus, in effect, this gives them the potential of having omnipresence.
Without Q, Isaac Newton would have died forgotten in a Liverpool debtor's prison, a suspect in several prostitute murders. Without Q, there would have been no concert at,
Woodstock.
wherever. Without Q, there would have been no William T. Riker at all. And I would have lost at least a dozen really good opportunities to insult him over the years. Oh, and lest I forget, without Q, the Borg would have assimilated the Federation. Thank you.
However, they likely don't use this advantage. Ironically, it would take too much time for them to be omnipresent. While the Q can appear anywhere, they don't. We know this for a few reasons, the most well-known of which is when Quinn attempts to hide from John Delancey's Q and is successful for a time. Someone that is omnipresent, that is anywhere, cannot be hidden from. However, if John Delancey's Q was able to use infinite time, he would eventually find him, which he does. So it is a little bit tricky. Is he omnipresent? He has the ability to be, but isn't. And ironically, this leads right into, are the Q omniscient? I just answered it, but the Q probably have the ability to be omniscient, but they aren't. They would need infinite time and be doing literally nothing else while doing everything else. However, we know that they don't do this. While there are some instances where the Q appear to know the future or varying timelines, there are instances when they are caught unaware. Again, one Q hides from another. John Delancey's Q even seems surprised that he gets hit by Cisco. They clearly aren't fully aware of what's going to happen. This would mean that they lack the actual omniscience, or at least don't take advantage of it. And now let's discuss if they are everlasting or eternal. The Q are obviously not everlasting, nor eternal, but we had evidence of that before even Star Trek Picard. We see in TNG that the Q can renounce their powers and be killed. Before Picard, some might argue that the Q could live eternally with their powers, but that's not exactly the eternal powers that we equate to a god, at least not the Abrahamic god. And ultimately, we know that Q does die. Originally, he never knew if it was possible, but apparently it is, and if a Q can die, they obviously aren't eternal. And that leaves Omnibenevolence. Is Q all good? Well...
You serious?
No. Q is not all good. He has not always done good things. He may have done things that are needed, things that are necessary, things that are justified, but he's not good. So in the end, are the Q gods? Well, honestly, I think they are. But they aren't in the Abrahamic sense. The Q are certainly all-powerful, but they're also fallible, as the Greek gods were in all of their splendor. They have the same capabilities and the same archetypes and mannerisms as the Greek gods as well. Now, as I mentioned before, and have stated, it's quite possible that they have technology that they used as well. Not only that, but there is evidence that the Q used technology and this wasn't something inherent. I know people like to give examples of a Q using their powers without knowing it or doing it reflexively, but we do that with technology all the time. We reflexively use technology without thinking about it. What we think is mundane is pure magic to those who lived in the 1200s. So just because a Q reflexively does something doesn't mean that there isn't some technology behind it. In the end, whether the Q are gods or not, whether they're false gods, it really depends on how you define a god. As I stated at the top, I don't think gods exist, not in the Trek universe. I think the universe was crafted in a way that a god or gods is simply a more powerful being that takes technology and uses it like magic, which I think actually leads into a more powerful discussion. As Kira put it once, does it matter if you can explain everything the prophets do? If they are gods and they look out for those less than them, then who cares? And ultimately, we do know that the Q continuum fades into memory, where it wouldn't even exist or they wouldn't see them in the 31st and 32nd centuries. They fade to ash, just like all of us will. Thanks so much, Kurtzman, for this hopeful future. But these are my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to rate, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you on the next Lore Reloaded.